Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a fascinating historical paradox, the migration of Jewish refugees to the Ottoman Caliphate. We're going to be relying strictly on documented historical texts here, exploring how an era of profound displacement was actually transformed into this incredible period of mutual prosperity. Okay, picture this. It's 1492. Spain's King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella have just issued the Alhambra Decree, completely expelling their Jewish population. But across the Mediterranean, Ottoman Sultan Bayezid II had a completely different reaction. He reportedly mocked King Ferdinand openly with this quote, basically wondering how a leader could possibly be considered wise when he willingly drove away such a vibrant population, directly enriching his rivals. Honestly, it's an epic piece of 15th century political trash talk. And this right here perfectly captures the stark contrast of the era. On one side, you have the Spanish Inquisition resulting in forced conversions and mass expulsion. On the other, the Ottomans took these highly proactive measures. Sultan Bayezid didn't just open his borders. He actively dispatched the Ottoman Navy, under Admiral Kemal Reis, to safely evacuate the refugees. He even issued a formal decree, a firman, ordering his governors to give them a friendly reception and immediate citizenship. So this wasn't just mere tolerance, it was an active rescue mission. To truly grasp this incredible shift from sanctuary to prosperity, here's our roadmap. We'll trace the refuge in the Ottoman state, check out their medical and cultural contributions, dive into the textile trade and the economy, look at the transfer of military technology, hear some Jewish perspectives on sanctuary, and finally, unpack the Dhimmi covenant. All right, Section 1, Refuge in the Ottoman state, the foundations of a safe haven. Let's look at the timeline of how this sanctuary actually came to be. This wasn't just some one-off event in 1492. It actually started much earlier, around 1453, when the Ottomans were actively encouraging Jewish refugees from all over Europe to settle in newly conquered Constantinople, and it continued long after. Just look at the 1556 Ancona incident. You had former Marranos, these were Jews who had been forced to convert to Christianity but then reverted to Judaism, facing the Inquisition in the Papal States. Pope Paul IV had literally declared their lives forfeit. But Sultan Suleiman directly intervened, demanding a reprieve for anyone who claimed Turkish protection, quite literally saving them from being burned at the stake. Moving right along to Section 2, Medical and Cultural Contributions, the fusion of East and West. Let's see how this sudden influx of refugees began shaping the cultural landscape of the Caliphate. These refugees brought some seriously specialized expertise with them. The historical records of the Ottoman palace reveal something pretty amazing. They had two completely separate core physicians working side by side. You had Muslim doctors treating patients using traditional Islamic and Greek practices, and Jewish doctors practicing the absolute latest in European medicine. Brilliant figures emerged from this, like Moses Hayman, a Spanish refugee who rose through the ranks to become the personal physician to Suleiman the Magnificent. Oh, and alongside medicine, they brought the very first printing presses to cities like Istanbul and Salonika, a total game changer. We actually get a really vivid, boots-on-the-ground picture of this from the travel diary of Hans Dernschwam, who was a 16th century banking agent. He documented that Marranos were flooding into Turkey so they could openly revert to their faith. And listen to this insanely diverse list of trades they brought: goldsmiths, tailors, silk workers, refiners of ores. Dernschwam noted how highly organized they were. They even set up communal systems and hospitals so absolutely no one had to resort to begging. It was this remarkable self-sustaining social safety net built entirely by refugees. Which brings us to Section 3, Textile Trade and the Economy, Weaving an Empire's Wealth. Let's look at how all these unique skills translated into immense economic power. Now, the crucial point here is that this wasn't just a cultural exchange. As the historian Bernard Lewis points out, it sparked an absolute economic boom. Jewish merchants didn't just participate in the Ottoman textile industry, they became its pioneers. Entire manufacturing centers, especially in Salonika and Safed, were built from the ground up and operated by Jewish communities. They essentially became the vital middlemen, perfectly positioned to connect European, local, and Eastern markets. Just look at this number, 280,000 ells of woolen cloth. To put that massive figure into perspective, think about the Janissaries, the elite, highly feared infantry units of the Ottoman military. Jewish merchants in Salonika locked down an incredibly lucrative relationship as the primary suppliers for their uniforms. Ottoman account books show that the delivery of cloth skyrocketed from 96,000 ells at the start of the 16th century to 280,000 by the end of it. They literally became the indispensable engine running the military supply chain. and this economic integration spread across the entire empire. When an Ottoman pasha was sent off to govern a new province, they rarely wanted to handle all the complex financial logistics themselves. Instead, they relied heavily on skilled Sephardic Jewish men of business to manage their affairs. Because of this, groups of Spanish-speaking Jews would travel right alongside these pashas, and in the process, they established entirely new commercial hubs in major cities. We're talking places like Damascus, Cairo, and Baghdad. Integrating refugees directly expanded the empire's economic footprint across the entire Middle East. Okay, Section 4, Transfer of Military Technology, Shifting the Balance of Power. This brings us to a contribution that bitterly, intensely frustrated Christian Europe at the time. Even though the Ottomans were already heavyweights in warfare, European observers watched this whole migration with total dismay. In 1551, the traveler Nicolas de Nicolay basically lamented that these expelled refugees were taking critical advancements in weaponry straight to the Ottoman army. Spanish visitors complained bitterly that the very people King Ferdinand kicked out were now teaching their enemies how to manufacture advanced brass ordnance, firelocks, and gunpowder. It's wild when you think about it. By expelling their Jewish population, Spain had literally handed military supremacy right over to their greatest rival. Let's look at Section 5, Jewish Perspectives on Sanctuary, in their own words. We have to ask, how did the refugees themselves actually view their new home? Let's turn directly to the primary sources. This is a deeply moving excerpt from the famous Edirne letter. It was written in the 15th century by Rabbi Isaac Sarfati, a French Jew born in Germany who had found a home in Turkey. He writes with this profound sorrow about the agonizing persecution, the compulsory baptisms, and the daily executions his people were facing in Christendom. It paints a truly harrowing picture of the trauma they were desperate to escape. But then, in that exact same letter, the tone completely shifts to one of immense relief. Rabbi Sarfati makes this urgent, impassioned plea to his brethren to flee to the Caliphate. He contrasts the nightmare in Europe with the absolute sanctuary of Turkey. He points out that under Islamic rule, they are finally allowed to dwell in peace. He even touches on the freedom of just normal, daily life, noting that in Turkey they could wear precious garments in whatever colors they chose, whereas in Christendom, simply wearing the wrong color could get a Jewish child beaten in the streets. And even a century later, this feeling hadn't faded at all. Samuel Uske, a Portuguese Jew who wrote a famous historical text in the 16th century, compared the sanctuary of the Ottoman state to literally one of the most sacred moments in all of Jewish history. To compare the gates of liberty in Turkey to God parting the Red Sea for the Israelites, that is an incredibly powerful testament to exactly how this sanctuary was perceived by the people who found safety there. Just let that sink in for a moment. Finally, let's wrap up with Section 6, the Dhimmi Covenant, the Islamic framework of protection. Let's look at the underlying legal and religious framework that actually made this whole sanctuary possible. Because here's the thing, this hospitality wasn't just a quirk of Sultan Bayezid's personality, right? It was hardwired into Islamic law through the concept of the Dhimmi. This translates to people of covenant. It was a protected class of non-Muslim citizens residing within an Islamic state. It legally guaranteed their safety, their property rights, and crucially, the freedom to practice their religion openly. And that legal protection stemmed directly from a deep religious obligation. As we see in this hadith, the Prophet Muhammad established a very strict standard. He stated that he himself would argue on the Day of Judgment against anyone who harmed a person under this covenant or even burdened them unfairly. This core Islamic value of protecting non-Muslim citizens is quite literally what laid the foundation for the thriving, multi-religious society we've just been exploring. So, as we finish up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought. We've just walked through all these primary sources showing how a 15th century decree of sanctuary fueled an unbelievable era of innovation and shared prosperity. When we look at modern narratives surrounding refugee crises or the supposed historical clashes between East and West, how does this extraordinary era challenge what we think we know? History is always more complex and, frankly, often more inspiring than a simple summary. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive.